So, for our opening question of the episode, how do you think about career and community? And how do you believe they shape each other? Do you think about career beyond job titles? And when you think about community, what helps some people find real connection? How do career pressure and money stress change the way people show up in friendships? And what does real support look like when someone is in survival mode? While you take a second to think about it, let me introduce myself. Hi, my name is Elijah, but you can call me Lay. Welcome back to A Little Atypical, a space for the deep feelers and unconventional thinkers, navigating wellness, personal development, and lifestyle with a little more nuance. I'm here to bring fresh energy to the beauty, wellness, and personal development space by having the curiosity to dig beneath the surface. I like to talk about typical topics from a not so typical perspective, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. So, I spoke a bit about Q2 last episode, and I wanted to use this episode to talk about 2 out of the 3 themes for this year. Technically, for me, Q2 started April 12th, and it ends July 4th. And my personal 3 big themes for this year have been health, career, and community. And today I'm strictly talking about career and community. I'm leaving health out of this one because when I talk about health, I'm going to get into things that are more sensitive, things that I want to give you the chance to opt out of listening to if you're not in the headspace for it. So I'm going to save health for its own episode where I can set that expectation clearly from the beginning. But regardless, career and community felt like the right pairing for today because lately I've realized how connected they are. Honestly, this episode originally was supposed to be an episode where I just talk through my Q2 goals, and then it kind of turned into me looking at the structure of these systems. So, like how career is set up, how community is influenced by money and survival mode, and how all of that shapes the way we show up in life. If any of this interests you, stay tuned. Just to brief y'all in, career-wise, I actually am keeping my personal goal the same, but I decided to change my approach because the way I was doing it was a lot. And personally, I just need to get a few things off my chest, not one specific story or scenario, more like thoughts that build up when you're trying to make progress in a world that kind of expects linearness. It's going to be more about observations of the world because if your path is straightforward, like being a doctor, lawyer, teacher, nurse, people understand what you're doing. But when your path is creative, unconventional, or not packaged into a clean pipeline, it can feel like you're constantly defending your efforts and sometimes your existence. I already wrote on Substack about how frustrating this process can be, so I'm not going to rehash the whole thing here. I want to talk about what it does to your mind, though, because sometimes I think it's easier to not know what you want, because if you don't know what you want, like career-wise, you can try things without feeling emotionally attached to the vision. You're experimenting, you're collecting data, it's just a chapter. But when you know what you want and the path isn't straightforward and you keep trying different things and nothing is working and you keep ending back at the drawing board, that is one of the most mentally exhausting feelings because you're not just looking for a job title, you're trying to build a life that makes sense for who you are or, how you function in the day-to-day. I think that's why some people are very selective about their roles and work environments in the first place, because incompatibility does influence the experience of being in that. And something I think a lot about is this. When someone genuinely likes their role and like the industry they're in, or even if they don't love it but feel content and supported, career doesn't have to feel like this heavy, life-draining force. Even if career isn't the biggest aspect of their life, it doesn't automatically make them feel like they hate their life, There's this whole area of psychology called industrial organizational psychology that looks at the psychology of the workplace, how environments, expectations, and structures shape performance, motivation, and well being. And I really believe that when someone is in a work structure that actually fits how they function, like, you know how some people thrive in office because the social energy keeps them engaged, and others end up like doing better at home because they can control the atmosphere and stay focused. It can reduce a lot of friction. Like, obviously, not all conflict, but a lot of the unnecessary conflict that comes with people being forced into systems that don't match them. But even beyond personal differences, we're in a moment where layoffs, constant restructuring, and hiring freezes create a different kind of workplace stress. Because when you're working with the fear that you might not, quote unquote, make the cut at any moment, that can't be good for morale or motivation. And when hiring freezes are happening, it creates gaps even for people who do have the skills. People who are qualified can still end up stuck outside the door. So I'm just going to say I hate the commentary around unemployment because it lacks so much empathy. People make their jokes, big news for the unemployed, or they comment job applications people when someone posts something unserious. And it doesn't even make sense because do people really believe people with jobs only care about their jobs? People with jobs engage with unserious things all the time to distract themselves. And also, can't people have personalities and interests outside of work? Also, in my brain, there are two types of unemployment. The first one is the one people tend to romanticize, quote unquote, fun employed. I don't know if people say this to just cope with like the hardness of being unemployed or if it is something they genuinely feel. If you never heard the term, it's essentially the unemployment that is fun because it feels like freedom from the daily structure. But I only think that works when you have at least two of the three, which is strong support systems, financial safety nets, or minimal or no financial responsibilities. And then there's the second type, which is the type of unemployment under survival mode, where it's multiple applications a day, trying to find affordable ways to attend events, informal interviews, joining networks, trying to find a mentor, getting certifications, updating your portfolio, trying to navigate LinkedIn while ultimately hating it. It's an identity crisis with a timeline. It's constantly asking yourself different questions. Like, if getting into that industry doesn't work, then how do I pivot? What is wrong with me? Why am I not good enough? What else do I need to do to make this happen? So, when people reduce that experience to a joke or treat unemployment like a moral failure, it's not just irritating, it's kind of dehumanizing. And speaking of dehumanizing, when people say the issue is that people don't know how to quote unquote sell themselves, honestly, I get an involuntary reaction because that word choice is just so interesting to me. Is job searching supposed to be voluntary slavery? Are we objects? No. And when someone says, well, you got to prove yourself, I'm always just like, why is the burden always on the person applying? Because viewing it that way overtly ignores the hypocrisy. So companies say that they don't have time to train people. So they will go for people who honestly should have higher positions, but then they pay them at a level as if they're just entering. So getting underemployed. But they somehow believe candidates have time for 5 interview rounds, unpaid sample work, dragging a decision out for months just for the job posting to be reposted again. Job seekers do not have unlimited time either. Surprise, surprise. I know some people do believe that, but they don't have unlimited time either, not for rewriting a resume for every single role, not for rewriting cover letters every time to adjust for the company. And with this, I've seen recruiters shaming people for using AI in the job search process in whatever ways they use it, while companies actively use AI to screen people out. And I know that people have their opinions on AI, but the point is the double standard. Whether you are 100% against AI because of the environmental factors, or if you're selectively against it in terms of being against like generative AI because of its influence in the creative spaces and you consider it extremely unethical. That's just besides the point. But you know what else is unethical? Doing hypothetical projects that sometimes turn into real ideas that the company keeps and produces without hiring you. Sell yourself, people say. That's the advice. And I have to ask again, are we people or are we products? School should count. Former projects should count. Previous work should count. All of those are evidence of skills, and yet people say people aren't doing it enough or assume that them being ignored is a signal of their value or what they can and can't contribute. But the fact of the matter is, entry level should actually mean entry level. And I think there are a few changes that would improve this whole system. One, stop putting 2 to 5 years on entry level roles. If it requires multiple years of direct experience, then it's not an entry level role. And also, there are things people do and it's kind of like unofficial because many of us, especially Gen Z, we've been using social media for as long as we've been preteens, sometimes earlier, like end of childhood age, you know? So I don't understand why for certain social media roles you need experience in social media if we grew up using social media. Next thing, make training a real expectation for entry level because entry level should include structured onboarding, mentorship, and just essentially a learning path. And it's not fair for companies to be like, oh, we don't have time to train people. But then you also don't consider the schooling people do as training, and you expect people to work during school to do internships. But ultimately, that's a privileged take because what if people are already working in something unrelated to pay for school in the first place? Next, separate application pools instead of like forcing everyone into like this giant chaotic bucket. Like I said, entry level should be primarily for people about 1 to 3 years out of college with training built in. Career switchers who are like mid to senior that probably were in another industry shouldn't be competing with brand new grads for the same entry roles because the needs are different. And also career returners, so people who stepped away and are re-entering the workforce, should have dedicated re-entry tracks and not be pushed into entry-level roles that just weren't designed for them. Next, expand internship access to post-grads and create more part-time early career roles. So internships should be open to recent grads up to a year because, like I said, if some people had to work, but the type of work they had to do was just simply to pay for school and it wasn't even anywhere close to what they were going for career-wise, then it makes more sense that they look for more roles that are tailored and internships that are tailored to what they actually went to school for. And there should also be legitimate part-time roles outside of internships as well. Because another thing is, what if people just aren't in a place for working full-time, especially before the age is 26? Maybe they want something more part-time, but then they can't find it in their industry because they want just people who are in college to do those roles. And just maybe people want to experiment with the different type of roles before solidly going for a full-time role because they want to make sure they like the skill sets being used. But anyways, last point, I just think overall make the process more humane and transparent, just less performance, clearer timelines, clearer expectations, and just fewer hoops that exist to just prove how much disrespect a person can tolerate. Adding on to that, something that also never made sense to me is why do applicants have to perform a deep love for a company just to be considered when companies don't view candidates as that valuable in the first place? Like in a capitalistic society, money is how people meet their basic needs. That's just the baseline. But beyond survival, a lot of people are just trying to build a life that actually fits them. So if you went to school for finance, you probably are looking for a finance role no matter the industry. But if you studied, like, let's say, fashion merchandising, you might be looking for roles primarily in the fashion industry, even if the job title shifts. Those are two different things. And either way, people want to use what they invested time and money into learning, so it doesn't feel like that aspect of their lives was just a waste of time. And that is not shallow nor entitled. And for the good of society, people do better work when they're doing something they truly want to do, or at least something that genuinely suits their skills and temperament. Because work takes up so much time of our lives for it to be a constant betrayal. And when people are trapped in roles that don't fit, it doesn't stay personal. It leaks. It affects coworkers, it affects clients, it affects the entire field and industry. And that's why I always say I save people's lives by not being a doctor, because if I hate blood and I'm squeamish about the human body, choosing medicine for quote unquote stability isn't admirable. It's dangerous. And the same logic applies to teaching, because you can love the idea of teaching and still be crushed by the limitations of the education system. And when educators are stretched thin because of, large class sizes and also the lack of support in like building the child's like educational ecosystem, because sometimes it's not that a teacher is bad, is that that train of structure is only at school. So a child can be struggling with the concept of education because of their own personal lives and their own upbringing. Sometimes that is not the fault necessarily of the parent, because then you have other situations like, oh, like if someone is a single parent, not necessarily by like choice, but let's say the partner passed away or something. So now you got someone who is trying to take care of a kid, and maybe they're doing two jobs to like have that financial support for their kid. So it's always a lot of things impacting one another. And I think we tend to forget that. And so if they have teachers reaching their limit, right? And it doesn't just impact them, right? Or the teachers who think, I don't know what else to do, so I'll just choose this. It impacts literally students, families, and entire communities when it's not something someone is truly invested in. So, with all that to consider, it just makes the way people talk about unemployment feel even more disconnected from reality. But I'm going to be honest for a second and say the conversation about careers and like sharing all of this really does make me nervous, because I feel like people will ignore all of my valid concerns about the job searching system and honestly the system of work and career and stuff like that, and boil it down to work ethic and thinking like, oh, this person is just complaining, when really the structures in place I just don't believe fully makes sense. Because why are career counselors sometimes people who haven't applied to roles in over 10 years? Wouldn't it make more sense for career counseling to be led by people who currently work in HR and need a part-time job, or people who have at least worked in HR within the last 5 years? And in college, right? If students get dean's rewards or reach a certain academic status, I wish all schools would do more than just like send a letter to congratulate them. At the end of each semester or the beginning, there should be networking lunches with people in the industry, because if those students are excelling academically, it makes sense to connect them to real opportunities and not just congratulate them through an email or a piece of paper. So, no, this is not just about an individual's work ethic. It's about systems that demand performance instead of support, and then blame people for burning out inside of the messiness of it all. Now, let's talk about community, because career stress doesn't just stay in that respective area of life. It follows you into your friendships, into how you show up. It follows you into what you can afford. It follows you into what you can emotionally hold. So, here's some tea. Originally, what I wanted to talk about this month as a theme was financial instability and how it affects somebody's ability to truly show up and be in community. However, I don't think I could have fully committed to the topic because it is something I really wanted to deep dive in, but I really did not have the time. So, while I was taking a break from note taking because I really wanted to organize my thoughts for this episode, I saw an article called "It's Hard Making Friends When Everyone Wants to Be Famous." I'm going to try to remember to link it in the show notes, but anyways, it really hit me because it put into words how I've been feeling about community and how community can start to feel like a commodity and social climbing in today's society, even if those are beliefs I don't want to hold about connecting to others. So I'm just going to say some of the quotes that stood out to me. 1. Regardless of where you live, the stakes are the same. People are now using social media as a way to fast track themselves to fame. All you need to do is look the part or look like you know what you're doing. Second quote, nowadays it's F friendships and F you, pay me. And I think the last one really summarizes like the moment we're in, which said people stopped forming community for connection and started forming community for convenience and commoditization. And that is what I mean when I say career and community are connected, because when everyone is in survival mode trying to secure a bag, friendship starts to look like what we used to only contribute to networking. Like, do y'all remember a few years ago when someone said they choose friends based off aesthetics? I can't remember who said it, but I remember thinking at the time how social media was like actively influencing connection, because yes, it's supposed to be about connection, but in cases of capitalism and survival mode, it kind of became more than that. I was reading a book, right? And it talked about building a social media following. And it said that if you want to be an influencer, you need also photos that reflect, groundedness. So not just content that's like promoting brands. It literally suggests like, having your pictures with your friends, family, pets. And even reading that, I remember thinking how unrealistic that is if your friends and family are naturally more private, and they shouldn't be subjected to that if that's not what they want for themselves. And because of that, I think that's why we started having influencer friendships. So you have people to do those things with you if that is one of your goals, but then still have like, your friends and your family. But sometimes it also becomes this like blurred thing, because then you have conversations about people about what is a genuine support from like friends or family when you're doing stuff like that. And overall, influencer culture and social media blurred the lines between like public life, professional life, and private life. And at the same time, you can't completely blame people for making content out of their lives, because at the root of it, is usually the desire to get out of survival mode and even just to have more flexibility and freedom. Social media also led to, like conversations about friendships. So, like the high maintenance versus low maintenance friends conversation. Like I mentioned, like what does genuine support look like? Like, should it be like a basic thing of friendship for your friends to like your content and stuff like that if they're following you instead of just watching? And just in general, like what people quote unquote owe each other and all of that. But I think a huge piece that gets missed in these friendship conversations beyond, communication styles, upbringing, and cultural views that we have because of upbringing is financial differences and how they shape friendship dynamics. And I think this really shows the most after high school years. But I do think some people have the experience, like if they were like one of those kids that went to like a private school but went in on a scholarship, maybe like in your youth you recognize this. But more often than not, I feel like people recognize it during like college years. So let's talk about the broke friend experience for a second. And I don't mean in like a judgmental way, that's just how it was worded. So essentially, when someone is worried about money, they tend to isolate. And to other people, especially people who don't have like financial struggles or career struggles or anything like that, isolation could look like ghosting, like someone not caring, and just like someone not being a good friend. But really, from the other person's standpoint, it could just, be like shame or guilt. And like, for example, I'm someone who grew up being told if you can't afford to bring something or anything like that, you shouldn't go anywhere. So, in my eyes, because of my upbringing, celebrations were never just about showing up. And especially with modern views of friendships and how there are these, standards for friendships, and I'm not talking about things like being kind and listening and being honest, etc. I'm more so referring to the way friendships have become more superficial because of social media. People have to show up, content ready and fit a vibe regardless of individuality in terms of personal style. And then there are times, where unity for events like makes sense, of course, like weddings or a themed birthday party. But like for brunches and like just regular birthday celebrations, is it really necessary to have commodity of an aesthetic? And then there's also this odd conversation about people being too dressed up or too underdressed. And it's like, I don't know. So celebrations in this type of dynamic leads to internal questions like, do you have something to give? Do you have money for transportation? Do you have things to wear? Do you have the emotional capacity to mask your stress so you don't bring down the vibes? And yes, sometimes friends do offer to cover you, and that's so generous. But for some people, it adds to the guilt and or shame instead of like releasing it, you know? There's literally an episode of Friends where, Monica gets a promotion and wants to celebrate. And, obviously like Ross and Chandler are like, yeah, sure, let's do that. And Rachel, Joey, and Phoebe are like, the other half doesn't get how hard it is financially. And I also read this piece, right? It's called I'm Not a Bad Friend, I'm Just a Broke Friend. And it puts together like the things that people don't necessarily see, like the quiet strategies people use to survive socially when money is tight. So the person talked about things like eating at home before going out, or being quote unquote busy to avoid spending, or having to leave early to avoid, expensive rides. And I think that's part of what makes adult friendships feel so complicated sometimes, because so many connections, you know, they aren't always built on interest. They're built on proximity, career, upward mobility, And I also get why, because in a capitalistic society, career takes up so much of our time, energy, and identity that it naturally influences what we look for in community and even what community is allowed to look like. And like thinking of all this made me realize my discomfort with networking because yeah, I do create content, but I don't think I necessarily have a community for content creation. I know people who also make content, but we genuinely have our own things. And what connected us initially was through hobbies, not content creation, but like books, which made a huge difference. And I network professionally, but I hate it every time because I don't know how to keep having conversations after the first interaction. And then I get worried that I'm gonna come off as like an opportunist when really I just don't know how to keep in touch without it feeling forced. And part of that is that professional relationships have boundaries of professionalism. And I am someone who naturally has deep conversations. So I'm always like, what are the limits here? How do I know who is okay to going talking deeper than the industry with? And sometimes I don't have much to even say about the industry because I like to talk about things deeply. Even in my personal relationships, I like theories on life, hot takes, beliefs. I like knowing the way people think. So with professional relationships, and like I said, I already have social anxiety. So I just get so stuck because if I'm not working yet, right? What are we supposed to be keep communicating about? Like it just feels so performative. And in general, my experience, job searching puts me in the worst headspace for personal level friendships as well because the effort it takes to be, you know, upbeat and positive is essentially for me being emotionally repressed, and it's a lot. So sometimes I would rather isolate than show up half present. And maybe that's not ideal, but I'm just being honest. Here's a question I want to ask, right? Would you be okay with a person who shows up, but they aren't masking their emotions to be happy, joyful, or excited? Would you truly be okay with that? Or would you feel like being around them is too much, a downer, an inconvenience? In your village, can people just be who they are without limitation? Or would you rather people not show up until they meet your standards? And I'm not asking any of that to sound mean, but I really am just trying to get an understanding on the different perspectives of community. I'm asking because I think a lot of us want community, but we also police what community is allowed to look like. And sometimes we call it boundaries when it's really control. And even the conversations about like third spaces connects to this because people say we need third spaces beyond career, right? But then people want to exclude certain people from those free spaces, i.e., homeless people. And I saw a TikTok that made this point that stuck with me. And I saw a comment on it that said, you can't build community until you rewire how you think about homeless people. And like applying that concept to everything we're talking about you have to, if you want to truly build community, that you have to rewire your expectations of people that are just simply not experiencing the world the same way you have been or the way you are. That goes back to friendship in general because a lot of the limits we put on quote unquote community comes from, unchecked biases, who we think we belong, who we think is safe, and who we think is worthy of care. And this is why we need to be having these conversations and authentic and raw conversations about community. So, yeah, I realize this episode is kind of a rant, but I told you I wanted to be very honest this month and just not sugarcoat things. And when I started planning, I realized I had more to say about the process and the societal influence than about the specifics of, what I'm doing in regards to those themes. Because honestly, I'm still wrapping my head around them. But I hope you enjoyed the rawness of this and gave you things to think about. Because I know the vibe is resurging spark and stuff like that. And I think part of me resurging my spark and embodying my identity this time of year is not hiding my truth and beliefs and just like watering down my opinions, even if people disagree. Because there's a point in your life where it feels like you have nothing to lose. And logically, when you get to that point, you start seeing that there is more to gain. So, will I be disagreed with or face backlash for some of the things I think or said? Probably. But maybe I'll also find more like-minded people by just saying what I'm thinking. Like my community, my soul tribe. Because wealth isn't just financial. Wealth is also the people in your life and the freedom in how you spend your time. So if this episode resonated, send it to a friend who's, navigating career uncertainty or friendship shifts, or if you want to use this as a talking point so you can discuss with your friends about your situation. Because sometimes, honestly, just saying things and being upfront about all what your experience is actually really hard. Because especially so many of us are kind of trained to keep things and put on a performance. And, as always, take what you need, leave what you don't. I honestly don't have much to update on, so I'm just going to wrap up today's episode with a card pull from the Moonology deck. I am working on this episode near the Libra full moon, but because I might schedule this post for April 20th instead of the 13th, I'm not sure yet. My intention is to pull a message for the collective that keeps the momentum going. The Aries new moon happens about 2 days before the sun enters Taurus. So as always, if card pulls aren't your thing and this is where you click off, thank you for listening, and be sure to come back next week. Follow the podcast so you can stay up to date with new episodes, catch up with old episodes, and rate the podcast 5 stars so more like-minded people can add it to their rotation of content. Anyways, for the card pull, to bridge together Aries and Taurus energy, I am asking for a message for the collective to help them stay grounded in the goals, projects, or anything they started for the astrological new year. And the card we got was New Moon Eclipse, Expect Powerful Change. If you want affirmation that you can achieve your dreams and get the desired outcome in the situation you're asking about, then this is it. This is a card of beginnings and there are powerful energies at work. But be prepared. It could be quite a ride, and events now could even be jarring and uncomfortable. However, any new directions you take will almost always lead somewhere better than where you are at the moment. Whatever is happening now is happening for a reason you'll appreciate later on. A new portal is opening up, and all you have to do is have the courage to forget about the past and move through it. You're being put back on the right path. There is nothing to fear. Attune to the moon. Never mind the past. Life evolves every single day. Additional meanings for this card. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. You are being shunted towards your life purpose. Whatever is happening now is happening for your highest good. This is an important turning point in your life. The teaching. New moon eclipse are among the most exciting astrological events. They herald a complete change of pace. It's as though you're headed in one direction, probably being guided by your ego. And then here comes the divine, the goddess or spirit, to turn you instead to face the direction you actually need to go. Regardless of whether or not there's a new moon eclipse happening when you pull this card, it's a powerful affirmation of positive turnarounds. So basically, why we got this card, I believe, is because for the goals, projects, and fresh starts you set in the astrological new year, this card is a reminder that momentum can build quickly and change can come in ways you did not plan for, but it is still moving forward. If something shifts suddenly, it's not punishment. It may be a redirection towards something that's like way more aligned and sustainable for you as we, move from Aries energy into Taurus, which Taurus energy is very grounding and, a little stubborn. So let the old plan, the old timeline, or the old version of you fall away without shame. Stay grounded, stay opened, because those are not opposing things, and trust that this turning point is clearing the path for what you have been working towards. And that's all for today. Thank you for tuning into today's episode of A Little Atypical. If you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe, especially if you're on YouTube, and share this with someone who might need to hear this message. Remember, view the description box where you can find important links such as the one to my website where there's so much more bonus content, and of course my Substack, which I am actually working on moving some of my content to. But yeah, until next time, have a good day, evening, or night, and stay authentically atypical. Okay, bye!